I would consider myself a fairly experienced LSD user. I've tripped at least 50 times, as well as used mushrooms, maybe at least 20, and I smoke cannabis regularly. LSD has always been my favorite substance by far, and my journey with it had been nothing but positive in the beginning. It felt like my mind was processing thoughts and comprehending things that weren't possible with my regular state of mind, and the visuals were always great. Eventually, though, things began to take a turn and become a lot darker for some reason. I'm still not exactly sure why, as I've been in a fairly good place in my life, and don't see how my mindset could have manifested what was to come. My last few trips, I swear I could see things moving in the corner of my vision, almost like shadows, but then nothing there when I look. But anyways, this all leads into my most recent, and most likely last trip I'll ever have on LSD. I was renting out a small house near the beach with 3 other friends at the time. They all planned to make a trip out of town to a local festival, but I decided to stay behind as I was really behind on schoolwork and had a major exam coming up. I had some very potent tabs that I was holding on to for the perfect opportunity, and having the entire house to myself without any distractions, I knew this would potentially be the perfect time to take them, since they wouldn't be returning home until the next day. My dealers said that 1 is enough to trip pretty good, and 2 would make you absolutely trip balls. Well, thinking that I was fairly experienced at this point, and wanting to make it a memorable night, I decided to just take all 6 that I had on hand, all at once. Biggest mistake of my life. I began the trip in my bedroom at around 6 p.m. in the evening. Everything was normal as usual during the come-up, with patterns beginning to overlay everything that I looked at. It was very beautiful, and the vibes were all positive as I put on one of my favorite trippy psychedelic albums. About 2 hours into the experience, as I was nearing the peak, I had to take a leak. I proceeded to get up off my bed and walk towards the bathroom. My vision was covered in the most beautiful mandalas and patterns that were overlaying everything as I made my way over and eventually managed to locate it. As soon as I entered it, it was not the bathroom that I typically remember. It was more alive than ever, with intricate geometric patterns moving across everything. As I lifted up the seat and began to empty my bladder, even my urine appeared to have a psychedelic tinge to it as well. I finished up and decided to go down to the living room and put something on to watch in order to help take my mind off of the sheer insanity that had now engulfed my entire reality. I sat down on the couch and instantly thought of when my ex-girlfriend used to sit here beside me as we'd watch movies together. It wasn't a thought of sadness or loneliness per se, but more so just analyzing all of the positives of our time spent together. We had been apart for about 6 months now, and I was fairly over it. She was a great cook and would always whip up the best creative meals while we were tripping on various substances together. I then had a thought to myself along the lines of, what really is the purpose to all of this life and existence? Why are we here, and what are we meant to do aside from just eat, sleep, and reproduce? I then heard a voice respond within my mind that said, consent and submit. Let go. Only then can you receive knowledge of the truth. At first this threw me off a bit as I wasn't sure if it was just a random thought that popped into my mind, but it felt external to me for some reason. So in that moment in my mind, I decided to oblige and submitted and let go for whatever this voice was. I then heard a strange, deep, sinister laugh in my mind that instantly made me question my decision. This is where everything began to take a turn for the worst. I could sense a change of energy in the room, and it felt like everything suddenly got heavier and more claustrophobic. The visuals began to change a bit at this point, from light and positive to a more dark and creepy undertone. I then heard the voice in my head again, and it said, as you wish, 1 soul fragment is all that is required. I had no idea what a soul fragment was, but it was interpreted to me as a small piece of myself. At this point, it was already too late, and things had really begun to take off now. I was peeking extremely hard at this point, and it began to feel like there was another presence, or rather multiple presences, in the room around me. I then heard one last message in my head, which said, "If truth is what you want, then truth is what you'll get. I think you're ready." The room felt very cold at this point, so I went over to turn the heat up, but it was already reading 77 degrees Fahrenheit. I turned it up a little more, and then went to go sit back down on the couch. As I was walking towards the couch, I suddenly stopped in my tracks, as I swore I could see what looked like a black, shadowy figure hunched down behind it, peeking up over it at me. I had to blink a couple of times to make sure that I wasn't just seeing things, but lo and behold, it was still there. I could feel an insanely dark and evil presence emanating from it. I decided that couch was no longer the place I wanted to sit, and turned around to leave the living room. As I entered the hallway, I looked back one last time to see the same shadowy figure still peeking out from behind the couch. I then ran up to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. I knew I just needed to chill out, because clearly I was just tripping extremely hard and imagining these things. Wasn't I? I turned towards my bed, and can only describe seeing what came next as what was the silhouette of the devil laying on my bed. He had a horrible, disfigured face, and sharp teeth with long horns. If it wasn't the devil himself, then all I knew was it was something extremely dark and powerful. I could feel the darkness and power emanating from it. We just made eye contact for what felt like an eternity before I decided to leave my bedroom and go into a different room. As I entered the hallway, this time I walked into a scene of what I can only describe as absolute chaos. There were shadow beings running all over the place, up and down the hallways, seemingly ripping apart the psychedelic space and all that was good in it. I could see them running towards me, running by me, running away from me, and all over the place. They were climbing up the walls and hanging from the ceiling. They were literally throwing a demonic house party at this point, except there was nothing positive about this party. It felt like pure, absolute spiritual warfare. I attempted to focus on light and love, as I often do when my mind begins to wander into a bad place, but it seemed to do nothing in my current state. I tried to breathe deep and calm down, and I proceeded through the chaos which was this house. Everywhere I looked was another entity watching me, grinning at me, and what felt like draining my life essence away from me. At this point, I knew that I needed to go outside and get some fresh air, so I headed out towards the beach. As I was walking, I could still see these shadow beings around me in the trees and watching me from behind certain objects. It felt like they were following me and were waiting around every corner that I turned. I eventually made it to the beach and took off my shoes and sat down in the sand, looking out at the water. I put my head into my lap, trying to think of a way to make this chaos end, but the closed-eye visuals were too intense to look at for too long. I opened my eyes again and looked up at the sky, as the moon and stars were out now. It actually looked the most beautiful in that moment that I had ever seen it. It was a reminder that there's something far bigger than all of us, and it's not necessarily up to us to be able to comprehend. I slowly began to calm down at this point, and the visuals slowly began to become less and less trippy as I spent what was probably hours there. I wasn't sure exactly what I had encountered back at the house, and if they truly were entities separate of me, or just a part of my own psyche or imagination. But regardless, in that moment, my spiritual perception was telling me that it was external to me and purely evil. In the following weeks, I began having sleep paralysis episodes, where I would continue seeing these entities and would sometimes wake up to them, mounting me or screaming at me without being able to move or do a thing about it. This would usually last for anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds on average, but sometimes even a little longer. It was beginning to take a toll on my mental health, so I talked to a few friends about my experience. Most of them just laughed and said, I need to stop watching so many scary movies. All in all, I feel like maybe I was attempting to obtain knowledge that I wasn't meant to know and was punished for it. But why? Aren't we allowed to be curious as humans? Why did I have to consent in order to receive this information? I have a hard time answering some of these questions. The only friend that didn't laugh at my experience recommended that I start going to church. I've never really believed in anything like that, but whether or not it's a coincidence, my sleep paralysis episodes have slowly begun to die down and don't last for as long anymore. Maybe it's connected, maybe not, but for now I'll continue attending and see how things progress. Be careful out there, because we don't always exactly fully understand these substances or what we're asking of the universe. I think that will be my last experience with LSD for a long time, if not forever at this point. That interesting chapter of my life is closed for now.